Weebs! Everyone knows about them, I think. In case you haven't though, they're essentially the next evolutionary step of mankind. Tall, imposing, smell weird, have this weird habit where all the watch lists they have tend to match up with their watch lists, if you get what I mean. But let's be fair, have weeboos really done nothing good for society? Well, no, but has Japanese art done anything good for society? That's a different question. To answer this question, we must first look at the famous go-getter Van Gogh. I like to think that most people know who Vincent van Gogh is. In case you haven't, however, he is essentially the equivalent of a 21st century artist stuck in 19th century Europe. He's most well known for cutting his ear off, killing himself, and painting stuff like this. Ooh, pretty. Unfortunately for him, his work was not well liked by none other than the French Academy, or maybe it was the Royal Academy, or actually, I think it was the French Academy around this time. Don't worry, they only have a name change whenever France has a revolution. Thank God that never happens. The French Academy was an academic institution in France that held considerable sway over whether or not an artist's work would be considered good or not good. Ultimately, this manifested itself in the form of literal councils standing in front of artists and judging their work based on a series of strict criteria. Right, so, several problems here. Firstly, you drew a picture of a fisherman, and that's dumb. Famous people exist, so I assume that was just an oversight on your part. You also drew the water a deep purple color, and I've never seen a photo of a purple lake before, so I don't know what a photo is. Shut up. Your painting also left us on the fence, but ultimately we decided to reject it after finding out that you were a woman. Unfortunately, like most other civilized things throughout history, it was bound to fall apart eventually due to social change. One such example of change was the increasing practicality of cameras, which would soon supersede superfluous, photorealism. God damn it. Another example of change was the increasing contact between Europe and Asia, and by contact I mostly mean that in the military sense because of... This joke was funnier in my head. One such brazen Asian nation was the Empire of Japan, who had spent the last 200 years in complete North Korea tier isolation, mostly spurred on by feelings of, fuck Christians, man! You think your god is so cool because he allowed people to eat a little bit more fish and bread than they normally would. Our god has pulled a feast out of our ass! You boring Bible book motherfucker! And besides, why should they ever have to worry about the outside world? The only power that could possibly pose any threat to Japan would be China, and nobody could beat China. Well, until a tiny island nation barely a 20th the size of China started a war over selling his miners' trading rights, and China lost. Bad. Japan saw that going on, turned around, saw Matthew Perry over the horizon, Megalovania probably started to play, and bada boom bada bing, Japan could no longer be isolationist thanks to the Americans and their steamboats, which, on a quick tangent by the way, the Japanese had never seen before, so they had simply called them black ships. Here's a depiction of one now. I just wanted to make this joke, I'm not sorry. Anyway, almost immediately, the Japanese understood two things. One, if they were not going to turn out like China, they were going to have to become a great power themselves, and two, the current government kind of sucked. Thus began the Meiji Restoration period, which was a period of centralization, westernization, and modernization at a frankly horrifyingly fast rate. In addition to these internal changes, Japan was also in the interest of improving its prestige in the rest of the Western world to make them seem like a civilized nation that couldn't be colonized. Please do not colonize us, and this mostly manifested itself by showing off a bunch of Japanese art and culture to the rest of the Western world. This kinda actually worked. Not making them feel like they were equals in the eyes of Europeans, oh god, don't be silly, they don't have Jesus, but they were successful in getting European powers to appreciate Japanese culture and history. Well, at least as a novelty. Then along came Van Gogh and his art dealer brother Theo, who in a shop in Paris began to buy lots and lots of Japanese woodblock prints, also known as ukiyo-e if you're really not that into sex. Now, Van Gogh specifically was really into these prints. Obsessively so, actually. By obsessive, I mean in the course of a single winter, Van Gogh bought literally hundreds of prints. He would then go on to hang them up around his studio and use them as background props in his paintings in very, very subtle ways, like in this painting here of a Parisian art dealer who, by the way, did not sell any woodblock prints. He even went so far as to make his own copies of famous prints using oil paints by a guy named Hiroshige. I once had a friend who called them Hiroshige. We are not friends anymore. And of course we know all this because of a bunch of letters that Van Gogh sent to his brother and friends, in which he would not shut up about this kind of thing. So, Van Gogh was a total weeb, right? No. Yes. I mean, yes. No. Fuck. Now, obviously Van Gogh wasn't a weeaboo in the same way we think of them now. He didn't exactly try to get his hands on a katana and a black coat and, well, legal limitations prevent me from saying that I'd be supportive of Vincent van Gogh, if you will, on a revenge-driven killing spree against the French Academy with katana in hand, but it would certainly make researching this topic a little bit more interesting. While it's true that he held Japan in some sort of spiritually superior light, as for the country itself, he didn't have much care for it. He didn't try learning the language. In fact, this Japanese text on the copy of the Plum Orchard and Tomato here is literal nonsense he put there because he thought it made it look more foreign. In truth, he saw Japan more as a reflection of a primitive, naturalist, and serene society whose artists were much more in touch with nature than those in Europe. I also find this interpretation of Japanese art quite funny because it's the literal opposite of what the Japanese government was trying to do by sending it out to the West, but the West had the benefit of not having to worry about what the Japanese thought for at least another 50 years. It's understandable why someone like Van Gogh would idolize Japan in such a light, however. He idolized Japan as a sort of land of quiet serenity, and serenity is something that someone like Van Gogh absolutely needed. Van Gogh was still enamored by the serenity of the Japanese landscape, or, well, drawings of the Japanese landscape, and wanted in on the action himself. Van Gogh knew he could never afford a trip to Japan in the first place, though, so he decided to move to the south of France instead, which was about as close as he could get, which he also could not afford. Hey, wait a minute, Van Gogh said. Wouldn't it be nice if I could invite all my other artist friends down to the south of France so we could pull our resources together and afford to live in this utopia while caring about nothing but our workflow? Wait a minute, isn't that just communism? Yes! Beam claiming with confidence to set up this new socialist, painter's utopia down in the south of France, Van Gogh went over to the French city of Arles, bought a nice little house, painted it yellow, filled it with Japanese paintings, obviously, and invited all of his artist friends through the phone. Hold on, let me check something. He invited all of his artist friends through the postal service to come join him. And nobody came. Well, save for Gauguin. In case you don't know who Gauguin is, think Van Gogh but insufferable. But even then, unfortunately, the Gauguin-Van Gogh show was a no-go. Oh no. Over time, Van Gogh and Gauguin's relationship began to deteriorate more and more, which slowly caused Van Gogh to go into more and more depressive episodes, which is, by the way, what caused him to cut off his ear, which is, by the way, something he had no recollection of, which is, by the way, something he had gifted to a prostitute in a local brothel. This just gets worse and worse. Shortly after the whole ear incident, Gauguin left Arles, and Van Gogh's hope of a quiet community of artists was immediately shattered. He became increasingly prone to dramatic bouts of depression over time, and after a few more months in the South, part of it spent in a mental institution, Van Gogh suffered a final episode that caused him to shoot himself in the chest with a revolver. Ultimately, this would be his cause of death just a short while later. His brother Theo, in turn, would die of a heart attack about 6 months after the fact. You know, I make these videos for fun. This is supposed to be my escape. Why do I do this? I could have been a toy channel. Well then. Despite the admittedly short video this could have been, I still feel the story of Van Gogh's experience with Japan grants us great insight into what culture exactly is. The changes brought about by the simple introduction of a foreign and niche art style from a culture the West had never seen before greatly influenced the development of new styles and genres in the West that would ultimately serve as the groundwork as what we consider Western art in many ways. Some of them being great, some of them being, Point being, the inclusion and appropriation of Japanese art allowed for the development of a new and distinct Western style that would in turn later influence the cultures of the region they got the idea from in the first place. Culture doesn't exist in a vacuum. It can't be owned nor even collectively owned. They exist because of a long line of individuals who looked at something and thought, yeah, that could be cool. The novelty, the exposure, the sharing of these ideas, those are what allow a culture to develop into something more interesting than what we had before, and the separation of foreign cultures and art out of the desire to preserve a culture, yours or otherwise, does nothing but deny everyone the chance at seeing something new and great. So, thanks, Weebs.